I never thought I'd live long enough to be a stranger in my own home. That afternoon, I sat in my old Ford pickup, parked on the curb outside the mansion my son built, our family home, clutching a white envelope that felt heavier than stone. The words stamped across the top read, "Notice of Eviction." It was signed by my daughter-in-law, Vanessa Green. I must have read it a dozen times, trying to make sense of it. My name, Arthur Green, the date, the legal jargon. It was all correct, all real. My own son's wife had given me 3 days to leave the house I helped pay for. The place looked different already. New locks glinted in the afternoon sun. Daniel's old workshop, the one we'd built together back when he was just a kid with dreams bigger than both of us, was now sealed shut. A silver sports car sat in the driveway where his old pickup used to be. I could still hear him, clear as day, his laughter echoing in that driveway. "Dad, someday I'll buy you a house 10 times bigger than this one." He kept that promise. He did everything right, until the night he didn't come home. It's been 7 months since that night. I remember the phone call, the static on the line, the officer's voice saying there'd been an accident. My heart sank before my mind even caught up. Daniel, my second son, my pride, the one who carried my name forward, gone in a flash of twisted metal and broken glass. The days after that were a blur. Grief, confusion, paperwork, condolences that felt hollow. Vanessa sobbed on my shoulder at the funeral, her makeup running, whispering, "I don't know what I'll do without him." I held her like my own daughter, promising her she wouldn't face any of it alone. But somewhere between the graveside and the weeks that followed, something changed. It started with her pulling away. Calls unanswered. Doors closed. A chill in her voice whenever I mentioned Daniel's name. Then one morning, she showed up with her lawyer, calm, dressed in black, holding papers she claimed Daniel had updated months before he died. A new will. I didn't think much of it at first. Daniel had been a careful man, maybe he'd just reorganized things. But as she read it aloud, my hands started shaking. The company shares? Hers. The investment portfolio? Hers. The house, the one I helped him build from the ground up? Hers. And my grandson, Oliver, legal guardianship? Also hers. She said it all with this strange mix of sorrow and finality, as though she was reading a script she'd rehearsed 100 times. When I asked to see Daniel's signature, she hesitated just long enough for me to know something wasn't right. But before I could question it, she stood, smiled tightly, and said, "Arthur, I think it's best you start packing." It's what Daniel would have wanted. 3 days later, that envelope was in my hands. I'd buried my son, and now, she was burying me in shame. Neighbors watched as I carried boxes to my truck. Some nodded, some whispered. Not one offered a word. By the time the sun went down, I had nothing left but my clothes, my truck, and a handful of photos of the family I thought I still had. I sat there, staring up at the lit windows, and saw a small shadow in the second-floor window, my grandson, Oliver. He lifted his hand to wave, but before he could, a curtain snapped shut. That was the moment it hit me, she wasn't just taking the money. She was taking him too. I whispered to the night air, "You can have the fortune, Vanessa. But you'll never bury the truth." She took everything, the house, the business, the legacy, my grandson. But fate wasn't done with us yet. That night, as I slept in my truck outside the house I helped build, I swore I'd learn how it all went so wrong, and how far one woman would go to erase the man who made it all possible. My name is Arthur Green, and for most of my 68 years, I believed I'd built a life made of solid ground, one where love, hard work, and loyalty would stand stronger than time. But I learned, far too late, that even the strongest foundations can crack when money starts whispering in the wrong ears. I wasn't born into wealth. I earned everything with oil-stained hands and sleepless nights on drilling sites across Texas and Colorado. I started as a field mechanic, then an engineer, and eventually owned a small contracting firm. My wife, Eleanor, was the heart behind everything, the kind of woman who could turn a trailer in the desert into a home with just a lamp, a song, and her laughter. We raised 2 boys, Michael, my eldest, steady and cautious, who moved away to build a quiet life in Oregon, and Daniel, the dreamer, the one who reminded me most of myself when I was young. He had the spark. The ideas. The will to risk everything for something greater. When Eleanor passed away from cancer 12 years ago, Daniel was the one who kept me breathing. He'd drive up every Sunday, cook dinner, and force me to eat even when I didn't feel like it. "You can't fade away, old man," he used to say with that grin that made people trust him instantly. "You've still got too much life left." And he was right. When Daniel met Vanessa, I thought God had sent him a miracle. She was beautiful, well-spoken, the kind of woman who filled a room with confidence. She came from money, too, not oil money, but old real estate wealth. They met at an investors' conference, and from the way he talked about her, you'd think she hung the stars. At their wedding, Daniel pulled me aside, his voice thick with emotion. "Dad, she's my forever. I'll take care of her, Mom would have loved her." And for a long time, he did. They built a company together, Green Technologies, a smart drilling firm that Daniel designed from scratch and I helped fund with my life savings. Within 5 years, the business exploded. They bought land, built a mansion, and even opened scholarships for kids from the same small town where I grew up. But success has a way of changing people. At first, it was subtle, little things. Vanessa would make jokes about old-fashioned habits, like my refusal to use her catering service during family dinners. Then she started suggesting that Daniel modernize the company, remove me from decisions, for efficiency. Daniel always defended me, but the pressure was there, quiet, constant, corrosive. I noticed she'd start conversations with, "When you're gone, Arthur," as if my death was a financial strategy instead of a human event. Still, I stayed patient. She was his wife, and I wanted peace for his home. When Oliver was born, their only child, everything softened for a while. That boy brought light back into all of us. I was there the day he took his first steps in my workshop. Daniel had been fixing a small motor, and Oliver, barely steady on his feet, stumbled toward him, arms outstretched. I still hear Daniel's laughter when I think of it. "See, Dad? Even he's drawn to hard work." We made it a ritual, Saturday fishing trips, just me and Oliver. He'd sit beside me, holding his tiny pole, asking endless questions about his dad's projects, his mom's garden, my old days on the rigs. He had his father's curiosity, and that gave me comfort. But beneath the peace, Vanessa had already started shifting her attention, not toward family, but toward control. She started handling Daniel's appointments, filtering his calls, even deciding who he could meet with. She'd tell me he was too busy for lunch, though I'd later learn he was home that day. When I confronted Daniel about it, he sighed. "Dad, it's just easier this way. You know how Vanessa gets when I'm stretched too thin." I didn't push back then, I wish I had. Because the truth is, she'd been building her plan long before that car crash. The last time I saw Daniel alive was a week before the accident. He came to my place for dinner, no suits, no business talk, just father and son sharing roast chicken and beer. I remember him saying, "Dad, if anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll look after Oliver." I laughed it off. "Nothing's going to happen to you, son. You're stronger than I ever was." He looked down at his hands, quiet for a long time. "Sometimes strength isn't enough," he said softly. That sentence has haunted me ever since. When the call came about his death, single vehicle collision, late at night, I couldn't process it. But what broke me wasn't the crash. It was what came after, the speed, the efficiency, the almost mechanical way Vanessa took charge of everything. She didn't grieve. She managed. She arranged. She controlled. And standing beside her at the funeral, I felt something I never expected to feel toward my son's wife: fear. I told myself I was imagining it. That grief was making me paranoid. But as I'd soon learn, Vanessa wasn't just mourning a husband. She was preparing to erase a legacy. I lost my son that night, I tell myself often, but I didn't realize I was about to lose everything else too. That's how greed works. It doesn't come with thunder. It whispers. It smiles. It wears perfume and says, "Trust me." And that whisper had already begun turning into something far darker. The night my son died, the sky was angry, one of those Colorado storms that rolls in fast, heavy with thunder and judgment. I remember it like it happened an hour ago. Daniel had been at a late investor dinner downtown. He texted me around 8:30 p.m., short, casual, nothing unusual. "Heading home soon, Dad. Rain's picking up. Love you." It was the last message I ever got from him. By 10 p.m., the rain was pounding so hard against the windows it sounded like gravel. I was sitting by the fire, watching the flames twist, when my phone rang. Unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice came through the static. "Mr. Green. This is Officer Darnell with the Denver Police Department. Are you the father of Daniel Green?" Those words froze everything around me. My throat tightened. I managed a quiet, "Yes. I'm afraid there's been an accident," he said. "Your son's vehicle was discovered off Highway 36, near the old quarry. He didn't survive the crash." I don't remember much after that. I think I dropped the phone. The next clear image I have is standing in a sterile hospital room hours later, staring through the glass at my son's body. He looked peaceful, too peaceful. No blood, no bruises I could see, just this eerie stillness, like he was asleep and I'd walked in too late to say goodnight. The doctor explained the impact had been severe. "It seems he swerved suddenly," he said. "We suspect hydroplaning. We'll know more after the investigation." Vanessa arrived not long after. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. She let out a scream so sharp it tore through the quiet hallway. The nurses tried to calm her, but she clung to me, sobbing into my chest. "He was supposed to call me when he left. Why didn't he call?" At that moment, she seemed shattered, grief-stricken, broken. I held her, whispering, "We'll get through this, Vanessa. I promise." But by the second day, something about her changed. At the funeral, she was calm. Too calm. Every detail was perfect: the white roses, the gold-trimmed casket, the press release about Daniel's legacy. There were photographers, news reporters, even investors she'd invited. She wore black silk and diamond earrings. She gave a speech that made people weep, talking about Daniel's vision, his love, his commitment to family. But when I looked into her eyes, there was no sorrow there, just calculation. She didn't stand beside me when they lowered the casket. She stood alone, a few feet back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. That night, I stayed behind after everyone left. The cemetery lights flickered, and I stood by his grave, the sound of rain starting again. I whispered, "I don't know what happened to you, son, but I'll find out." I didn't know those words would become my life's mission. In the weeks that followed, I tried to keep busy, dealing with condolences, sorting through Daniel's workshop, keeping in touch with Oliver. But every door I knocked on in that mansion seemed to close tighter. Vanessa controlled everything. She blocked my access to company accounts, told employees I was taking time off. When I visited, I had to call first, and even then, she'd only let me see Oliver for a few minutes. The first time I noticed something off, it was in Daniel's office. I'd gone in to collect a few of his things, a photograph of us fishing, his pocket knife, the watch I gave him at his graduation. But when I opened his desk drawer, it was empty. Every file, every notebook, gone. "Vanessa," I asked, "where are Daniel's documents? His personal files?" She didn't even look up from her laptop. He digitized everything months ago. Don't worry about it. Something about the way she said it, cold, clipped, made my stomach tighten. Later that week, one of Daniel's old employees, a man named Ralph, came by to drop off some tools. He hesitated before leaving, then said quietly, "Mr. Green, I probably shouldn't say this, but the night before the crash." Daniel looked upset. He was in his office late, arguing on the phone. I heard him say, "I'll fix it in the morning." She's gone too far. Did he say who he was talking about? I asked. Ralph shook his head. No. But he looked scared. That was the first time the thought crossed my mind, the possibility that Daniel's death wasn't just an accident. I dismissed it at first. I told myself grief was making me paranoid. But then small inconsistencies began to pile up. The car, a brand new vehicle with advanced braking and traction control, had no mechanical faults. The investigators said the skid marks didn't line up with hydroplaning, it looked like a deliberate swerve. When I mentioned this to Vanessa, she snapped, "Are you implying something, Arthur?" He was exhausted. It was raining. Stop looking for someone to blame. Her reaction was sharp, defensive, too defensive. And then came the insurance call. A representative contacted me to confirm a transfer from Daniel's life insurance policy, $12 million. Transfer? I repeated, confused. To whom? To Mrs. Vanessa Green, the agent said matter-of-factly. It was processed 3 days after the accident. 3 days. That fast. That was when I knew, grief wasn't clouding my judgment. It was sharpening it. I started looking through my son's old emails, trying to piece together what had been happening before the crash. Passwords didn't work, all changed. His cloud account? Deleted. Bank records? Restricted. Every trail I followed led back to Vanessa. And when I finally confronted her, she smiled, actually smiled, and said, "Arthur, you need to stop. Daniel's gone. I'm the one he trusted. Don't make this harder than it has to be." That night, I sat in my truck outside the mansion, watching the lights in Oliver's room flicker out. The rain fell soft and steady, and I whispered to myself, "She's lying. She knows something." But I had no proof. Not yet. All I had was a gut feeling, the same instinct that kept me alive through decades of oil field deals and human greed. And that feeling told me the truth was about to surface, no matter how deep she tried to bury it. 3 weeks after Daniel's funeral, I learned what betrayal really feels like. It doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes, it comes dressed in formality, a lawyer's suit, a sealed envelope, and a voice that sounds polite enough to break you slowly. Vanessa called me one afternoon. "Arthur," she said, "we need to meet. There are financial matters to discuss." She asked me to come to the house, Daniel's house, though by then, it already felt less like home and more like a place where I didn't belong. When I arrived, she was sitting in the living room with her lawyer, a young man in an expensive tie who didn't look me in the eye. Vanessa smiled faintly. "I thought it best to handle things properly," she said. "Daniel made some adjustments before he passed." I frowned. "Adjustments?" She slid a document across the coffee table. "His will." My stomach dropped. I had already seen Daniel's original will years earlier. The one where everything was to be divided between his family trust, me, and Oliver's future. But this was different. Her voice was calm, rehearsed. "Daniel transferred all assets to me and named me as sole guardian of Oliver. You'll be taken care of course, but the property and the company are now mine to manage." I read every line slowly, my eyes burning. There, near the bottom, was Daniel's signature, familiar but off, like someone had tried too hard to copy his handwriting. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "From our lawyer," she said. It was updated 6 months ago. That's impossible, I replied. Daniel showed me his records just before the crash. He never mentioned any changes. Her smile tightened. Well, people don't tell their parents everything, Arthur. The air in the room felt heavy. You forged this, I said quietly. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Green, I'd advise you to remain civil. These documents are legally binding. I turned to Vanessa. You think I won't fight this? She tilted her head, her voice soft but cutting. Fight all you want. The company's accounts are in my name now. The estate, too. I'm protecting my son's inheritance, something you've clearly failed to do for yours. That last line hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war. 2 days later, I received a hand-delivered notice, eviction. I was to vacate Daniel's property within 72 hours. The humiliation was unbearable. Neighbors I'd known for years stood by their mailboxes, whispering as I packed my truck. I didn't bother explaining. How could I? What words could make sense of being thrown out of the house I helped build, the home where I'd once tucked my grandson into bed, where Daniel and I poured our savings, our sweat, our dreams. Vanessa didn't even come outside. She watched from an upstairs window, her silhouette framed by the curtains. As I loaded the last box, an old photograph of Daniel holding baby Oliver, she opened the door. Arthur, she said, her tone sharp but almost pitying, this isn't personal. You don't belong here anymore. It's time to move on. I turned to face her. Move on. My son is barely cold in the ground, and you've stolen everything he built. Do you really think this ends with you happy? Her eyes flickered for a moment, something like fear or guilt, but then she smiled again. I don't believe in endings. Just new beginnings, for me and Oliver. She closed the door, and I heard the click of the lock, final, metallic, cold. That night, I slept in my truck, parked just outside the gate. The mansion lights glowed softly in the distance, and through the window, I could see Oliver's shadow pass by his bedroom. He lifted the curtain slightly, spotted my truck, and waved. I raised my hand back, but then Vanessa appeared behind him, pulling the curtain shut. My throat tightened. I whispered to the dark, I'm still here, buddy. Grandpa's not going anywhere. Rain began to fall again, slow, steady, and cruelly familiar. As I sat there, drenched in silence, I thought about Daniel's life insurance, how quickly it had been processed. I thought about the fake signature on that will, about the cold precision in Vanessa's eyes. Pieces started connecting. She wasn't just greedy, she was prepared. Too prepared. By morning, I made a decision. I went through Daniel's old contacts, the few I still had access to. That's when I remembered Mr. Hayes, his original attorney, a man I'd met years back, one of the few people Daniel actually trusted. I called him immediately. When he picked up, I told him everything. The will. The eviction. The way Vanessa had changed since the accident. There was silence on the line before Hayes finally said, Arthur, Daniel never signed any updated will. I keep digital copies of every change, and there's no record of that version. Whatever she showed you, it's not legitimate. My heart pounded. Can you prove that? I can try, he said. But if she's gone as far as to forge documents, she's not working alone. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a family dispute. It was something darker, calculated, deliberate, and dangerous. I started keeping notes, every date, every conversation, every inconsistency. I may have been an old man, but I'd spent my life catching mistakes no one else saw, in contracts, blueprints, drilling reports. My instincts never failed me. And now, they were telling me one thing, Daniel's death and the stolen fortune were connected. The only question was, how deep did it go? That night, before driving off, I looked at the mansion one last time. The rain had stopped, the sky clear again. I whispered to the stars, "You built all this with your bare hands, son. I swear on your name, I'll take it back the same way." I started the engine, wiped the fog off the windshield, and drove into the dark, not away from the truth, but toward it. When you've spent your life reading contracts and schematics, you learn that every lie leaves a trace, a crooked line, a missing number, a detail that doesn't fit. And as I sat in my truck outside a cheap motel that night, that thought played on a loop in my head. Something about Daniel's death and that forged will didn't line up. The next morning, I drove straight to Mr. Hayes, Daniel's original lawyer. His office was quiet, the kind of place that smelled of paper and honesty, something the world seemed short on lately. He looked older than I remembered but still sharp. I handed him a copy of the will Vanessa had shown me. He adjusted his glasses, reading it carefully. His expression hardened. "Arthur, this isn't my work," he said flatly. "The formatting's wrong. My firm never prepared this." He pointed at the header. The legal code was out of date by nearly 2 years. Whoever made this used an old template. Daniel was meticulous about updates. "So it's fake," I said. He nodded slowly. "It appears that way. But to prove it, we'll need the digital version. Every authentic will has an encrypted record in our system. If hers doesn't match, it's forgery." I asked, "Can you check the record?" He leaned back, tapping his pen. "I can, but if she's already filed this as valid, she must have had help, someone with access." That word, help, sent a chill down my spine. Over the next week, Hayes and I started digging. I reached out to one of Daniel's former colleagues, Linda Cross, a retired forensic accountant. She owed Daniel a favor from years ago, and when she heard what happened, she didn't hesitate. "I'll help," she said. "People think they can hide money in numbers, but numbers always tell on you." She began combing through Daniel's business accounts, comparing them with new transactions Vanessa had made since his death. Within days, she found the first red flag: multiple wire transfers from Daniel's company to a private account in Vanessa's name. "Look at the dates," Linda said, showing me the printout. "These started the week before the crash: $50,000, $75,000, $100,000, small enough not to trigger alerts but consistent enough to be deliberate." She paused. It's like she was draining the accounts in pieces. I stared at the numbers, fury and disbelief mixing in my chest. She was stealing from him before he died. Linda's expression was grim. "It sure looks that way." Meanwhile, Hayes managed to locate the archived version of Daniel's real will, signed digitally and verified by timestamp. He printed both versions side by side. Even to my untrained eye, the differences were glaring. Daniel's authentic signature had fluid, natural motion, but the forged one was mechanical, each curve too exact. The date formatting was different too. "She copied his digital signature," Hayes said quietly. "Probably from another document. Whoever did this knew just enough to be dangerous." Then he looked up. "Arthur, there's one more thing. Daniel's last recorded communication with our firm was 3 days before his death. He sent an encrypted file, something about urgent updates, but we never received a follow-up. The file's locked. If we can open it, it might tell us what he was working on." I knew exactly where to start. Daniel had kept an external drive in his workshop, one only he and I knew about. Vanessa thought it was full of old company blueprints, but Daniel had told me once, that drive holds every key I'll ever need. I drove back to the mansion that night, parking a few houses down. The place was dark except for the kitchen light. I knew it was a risk, but I couldn't wait any longer. The back fence was still the same, the latch loose where Daniel and I used to sneak in when the gate jammed. I slipped through quietly, heart pounding. His workshop door was locked, but the small window was cracked open. I squeezed through, landing softly on the dusty floor. Everything was just as we left it, the smell of oil and wood, his old tools, the half-built model car on the bench. And there, tucked behind the cabinet, was the safe. I entered the code, Daniel's birthday and his mother's initials. It clicked open. Inside was the silver external drive. I took it and left without looking back. The next day, Linda decrypted the drive. What we found changed everything. It contained financial records, voice memos, and a folder labeled Vanessa_transfer. Inside were screenshots of her bank activity, timestamps, transactions, and emails between her and one of Daniel's junior accountants. One of the emails made my stomach turn. Once he signs the update, I'll wire your bonus. Make sure the file is ready for digital certification. Linda looked at me. That accountant, he's not dumb enough to do this alone. She was paying him. Another file contained Daniel's voice memo, recorded the night before the crash. His voice was shaky but clear. If anything happens to me, check the company accounts. Someone's moving money without my approval. I think it's Vanessa. I don't know how far this goes yet, but I'm scared. Hearing his voice broke something in me. He'd known. He'd found out, and the next day, he was dead. Linda exhaled slowly. Arthur, you need to take this to the police. Hayes agreed, but warned, if we do, we have to be sure. The insurance, the will, the timing, it all connects, but without proof of intent, it's circumstantial. I clenched my fists. Then let's get proof. Over the next 2 weeks, we quietly built the case. Linda traced offshore transactions, small amounts, laundered through shell companies, all leading to an account in the Cayman Islands under a corporate alias. Vanessa Green was listed as the sole beneficiary. Meanwhile, Hayes filed an injunction to freeze the estate until the investigation was complete. When the notice reached Vanessa, she called me for the first time in months. Her voice was ice. You think you can ruin me, old man? No, I said evenly. You already did that to yourself. She laughed bitterly. You don't understand, Arthur. You were never supposed to find out. Click. The line went dead. That night, I sat in my small apartment, the drive plugged into my laptop, Daniel's voice playing softly through the speakers. I don't know how far this goes yet, but I'm scared. I stared at his photo on the table, him holding Oliver, smiling, alive. I'm not scared, son, I whispered. Not anymore. The time for quiet grieving was over. It was time to confront her, and everyone who helped her bury the truth. By the time we pieced everything together, it felt less like uncovering a lie and more like digging up a corpse that had been carefully buried. Vanessa hadn't just stolen money, she'd orchestrated a plan that began months before Daniel's death, one built on deceit, manipulation, and calculated cruelty. It started to make sense why she was always organizing Daniel's schedule, why his passwords suddenly changed, why she insisted on taking over the financial wing of the company. She wasn't supporting him. She was cornering him. The breakthrough came when Linda found a string of hidden communications between Vanessa and a man named Jason Hart, Daniel's junior accountant, the same one who had quietly left the company a week after the funeral. Linda called me into her office and handed me the printed emails. Read the timestamps, she said. This one, the draft will, was created 2 days before the crash. The same day Jason logged into the company server using Daniel's credentials. My blood went cold. Jason accessed Daniel's private folder? I asked. Not just accessed, she replied. He copied it. Then he sent it to Vanessa's home IP address. The same one she used to file the fraudulent will afterward. She flipped to the next page, a bank statement. There's the kicker. 2 days after the crash, $300,000 appeared in Jason's personal account. Wire transfer from Vanessa's Cayman shell company. It was undeniable. She'd bought him, bought silence, bought documents, maybe even bought time. Mr. Hayes didn't waste a moment. He brought the evidence to a state investigator he trusted, Detective Cole, who specialized in financial crimes. When Cole reviewed the files, he sat back in his chair, expression unreadable. "You said your son's death was ruled an accident?" "Yes," I said. "Hydroplaning, they claimed." He nodded slowly. "Maybe it was. Or maybe it was the cleanest way to close a problem." Those words hit me like a blow to the chest. Cole continued, "Vanessa's pattern fits a motive: move assets, eliminate accountability, claim life insurance, and control the estate. But proving intent behind the crash, that's a different fight. You need evidence she tampered with the vehicle or arranged something." Linda leaned forward. "We can cross-reference maintenance records. Daniel serviced that car a week before the crash. If someone modified it after that, we'll know." 3 days later, she called me back, her voice tight with adrenaline. "Arthur, you need to see this." She had obtained the repair log from the dealership's digital system. A new entry appeared 2 days before Daniel's death: a brake calibration test done off-site, requested under Daniel's name but with Vanessa's contact email. Linda said quietly, "That test never actually happened. They billed it, but the dealership manager confirmed no technician performed it. Someone falsified the entry to hide another modification." I felt the room spin. "She tampered with the car." Linda nodded grimly. "Or had someone do it." Cole reviewed the discovery and ordered the wreckage re-examined. Within a week, the forensic mechanics report confirmed it: the brake fluid line had been cut and resealed with industrial epoxy. Not enough to fail immediately, but enough to make the brakes collapse under heavy rain and stress. Daniel hadn't lost control. His car had been sabotaged. The detective didn't mince words. "Mr. Green, this isn't just fraud anymore. This is homicide." Hearing that broke something in me, not just grief, but a wave of cold, focused fury. Hayes prepared the legal filings for both estate fraud and murder conspiracy. Vanessa's financial history was mapped out in detail: forged will, laundered funds, falsified maintenance orders. Each piece fit too perfectly to be coincidence. Before the case could proceed, Cole advised one final step: confronting Jason Hart. The police traced him to a small town outside Phoenix. Cole arranged for me to join the interview, though I was warned not to speak unless necessary. When they brought him into the station, Jason looked pale and jumpy, his hands trembling as he sat across the table. Cole opened with a simple question. "Jason, why did you access Daniel Green's financial records 2 days before his death?" Jason hesitated, eyes darting toward me. "Vanessa asked me to. She said Daniel authorized it. She paid well. I didn't think." Cole cut him off. "She also paid you after his death, correct?" Jason's lip quivered. "She said it was for legal fees." "I didn't know she was going to," his voice cracked. "I didn't know she'd do something like that." Cole slid the mechanics report across the table. "You didn't cut the brakes yourself, but you helped her build the story that covered it up. That makes you an accomplice." Jason broke down completely. "She said he was leaving her. That she'd lose everything if the divorce went through." The room went silent. "Divorce?" I repeated. Jason nodded miserably. Daniel had filed for it 2 weeks before he died. Vanessa begged me to delay the paperwork. She said if I helped her, she'd make me rich. I swear I didn't think she'd kill him. I closed my eyes. The truth hit me harder than any lie ever could. My son had been trying to leave her. And she'd made sure he never would. Cole arrested Jason on the spot. His cooperation later earned him leniency, but his testimony was the key we needed. By the end of that month, the district attorney's office filed formal charges against Vanessa Green: fraud, forgery, money laundering, and first-degree murder. The news spread fast. Media vans camped outside her mansion, reporters shouting her name. But she didn't come to the door. When the police finally entered with a warrant, they found her packing luggage. The moment she saw the officers, she dropped her glass of wine and whispered, "I knew this day would come." I wasn't there for the arrest, but Detective Cole later told me she didn't resist. No tears, no denial, just silence. That night, I sat at Daniel's grave again, the wind cold and sharp across the cemetery. I placed my hand on the headstone and said softly, "I found her, son. I found the truth. She can't hurt anyone else now." And for the first time in months, I didn't feel anger. I felt something heavier, justice, mixed with sorrow. Because when you uncover the truth, it doesn't heal you. It just stops the bleeding. A week later, I received a call from Hayes. "Arthur, the estate court's frozen all her assets. You're being reinstated as trustee for Oliver's guardianship." I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I whispered, "It's over, then." He sighed. "Almost. There's still the trial." But I already knew, whether she spent 10 years or life behind bars, she'd already lost the one thing money could never buy back, peace. That night, I looked through Daniel's old notebook. On the last page, he'd scribbled a quote in his familiar handwriting. "Truth doesn't need defenders. It just needs time." I closed the notebook gently and whispered, "Your time came, son." Courtrooms have a strange kind of silence, not empty, but heavy. Every cough, every shuffle, every whispered word feels like it echoes off the walls. That morning, as I walked through the courthouse doors, I wasn't just an old man seeking closure. I was a father demanding justice for a son who never got the chance to finish his story. Vanessa sat across the room at the defendant's table, her hair neatly pinned, her face pale but calm. She looked nothing like the woman who once laughed in our family photos, or the one who'd stood at Daniel's grave pretending to mourn. When her eyes met mine, she didn't look away. She gave me the faintest smirk, like we were still playing a game only she knew the rules to. But the game was over. The trial began with the financial evidence. Hayes presented the forged will first, walking the jury through every inconsistency, the outdated template, the mismatched fonts, the missing encryption signature. He placed both documents side by side on the big screen and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just a forgery, it's a roadmap of greed. Every change, every missing clause was designed to cut one man, the victim's father, completely out of his own son's estate." I watched as jurors frowned, shaking their heads. Then came Linda. Calm, precise, and devastating. She explained the offshore accounts, the disguised transfers, and the pattern that began weeks before Daniel's death. "Money doesn't lie," she said firmly. "These transactions were intentional, not accidental. They began under Vanessa's direction and ended in her control." The prosecutor followed up with Jason Hart's recorded testimony. His voice trembled as he confessed how Vanessa had pressured him to fake company entries and delete Daniel's warnings about the missing funds. Then the final piece, Daniel's voice memo. The courtroom fell utterly silent as his words filled the air. "If anything happens to me, check the company accounts. I think it's Vanessa. I don't know how far this goes yet, but I'm scared." Even the judge lowered his head slightly. For me, it was like hearing my son from beyond the grave, finally telling his truth. Vanessa kept her expression neutral, but her fingers twitched on the table. Then came the part one dreaded, the crash evidence. The mechanic who examined the wreck stood before the court, holding photos of the damaged brake system. "This wasn't a malfunction," he said plainly. "It was deliberate tampering. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." The jury gasped when they saw the epoxy-sealed tubing. The prosecutor turned toward Vanessa. "Mrs. Green, do you deny authorizing this maintenance order?" Her lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. Vanessa leaned into the microphone, her voice shaking slightly. I didn't know what that was. I thought it was a safety inspection." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. So you signed a work order, under your husband's name, 2 days before his fatal crash, and you didn't read it? She opened her mouth, then shut it again. No one spoke for several seconds. When it was finally time for the defense, her attorney tried everything, claiming stress, confusion, even emotional instability after Daniel's death. But the evidence was too strong. Too clear. The prosecution's closing argument was simple but powerful. Daniel Green didn't die in an accident. He died in a carefully orchestrated betrayal, one built on greed, fear, and deception. And today, the truth has caught up. When the jury was dismissed to deliberate, the weight felt endless. I sat there, hands clasped, staring at the empty witness stand where I had given my statement earlier. I'd told the court what Daniel meant to me. How proud I was of the man he became. How losing him broke something I could never repair. But I also told them something else, something that came from the part of me that still believed in grace. I don't want revenge, I said. I want truth. Because truth is what my son lived for, and what his son deserves to grow up knowing. After 4 hours, the jury returned. The foreman's voice was steady. We, the jury, find the defendant, Vanessa Green, guilty on all counts. The words hit like a wave, not loud, but final. Vanessa exhaled sharply, eyes glistening. For the first time, her composure cracked. When the judge read the sentence, life in prison without parole, she covered her face with her hands. A sound escaped her, halfway between a sob and a gasp. I didn't feel joy. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when the storm finally passes, and all that's left is debris. After the verdict, I stepped outside the courthouse into the crisp afternoon air. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions I couldn't hear. I ignored them and walked toward the bench across the street. From there, I could see the courthouse doors, the same ones Vanessa would walk through in handcuffs. A few minutes later, she did. Our eyes met one last time. There was no smirk this time, no defiance, just something hollow. She mouthed something I almost didn't catch, I didn't mean for him to die. I looked at her and said quietly, you meant for everything else. They led her away. That evening, I visited Oliver at the group home where he was staying temporarily until the guardianship paperwork cleared. He ran into my arms the moment he saw me. Grandpa. You came. I held him close, my throat tightening. I'll always come, kiddo. Always. He pulled back slightly and asked, is mommy in trouble? I swallowed hard. She made bad choices, son. But you don't have to pay for them. You just have to learn from them. He nodded quietly, his small hand holding mine. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The following week, I returned to Daniel's home, or rather, what was left of it. Most of the furniture had been seized as part of the legal process. The rooms were empty, echoing with ghosts of laughter and memories that time couldn't erase. I walked through each room slowly, stopping at Daniel's study. His old blueprint sketches were still on the wall, yellowed at the edges. I ran my hand across one, a design he'd made for a community center that was never built. I whispered, you left the world too early, but you left enough light for the rest of us to find our way. And for the first time, I didn't cry. If you've made it this far, and you believe that truth, no matter how buried, always finds a way out, subscribe to Untold Bloodline stories. These are not just stories about loss or betrayal, but about how dignity and courage still matter, even when the world forgets. That night, before bed, I looked out the window at the clear sky. Daniel's words echoed again in my mind, truth doesn't need defenders. It just needs time. I smiled faintly. Well, you got your time, son. And you got your truth. As I turned off the light, I knew one thing for certain, sometimes, justice doesn't roar. Sometimes, it whispers. But it always comes. It's been 2 years since the trial ended. 2 years since I watched the woman who once called me Dad led away in handcuffs. And in that time, I've learned that justice isn't the same as peace, but it's the doorway to it. The world didn't stop when the verdict came down. Bills still needed paying, the house still needed fixing, and grief still came in waves, sometimes small, sometimes enough to knock me off my feet. But life, somehow, kept going. I live now in a smaller house, on the outskirts of town. It's quiet here, surrounded by pine trees and morning fog. I built a little workshop out back, much like the one Daniel and I used to share. Some days, I still catch myself expecting him to walk in with a coffee mug and a half-smile, asking if I have a spare wrench. He never does, of course. But that's all right. His presence isn't gone, it's just changed form. Oliver lives with me now. He's 12, curious, smart, and full of that same spark Daniel had when he was a boy. At first, he didn't understand much about what happened. I didn't want to tell him everything, not yet, but kids have a way of sensing truth even when we try to hide it. One night, he asked me, "Grandpa, why do people hurt the ones they love?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. Because sometimes love gets twisted by fear, fear of losing what they have, or of being forgotten. But real love, I said, never takes. It gives. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since the whole nightmare began, I saw calm in his eyes. These days, we work together in the workshop after dinner. He likes building model planes, and I let him use Daniel's old tools, the ones I salvaged before everything was seized. Sometimes, he'll say, "Dad would be proud of us," and I'll just smile and whisper, "Yes, son." He would. Every few months, I visit Vanessa's prison. It surprises people when I tell them that. But forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for the one carrying the weight. The first time I went, she wouldn't meet my eyes. She sat there, hands clasped, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Why did you come here?" she asked quietly. "Because I wanted you to know," I said, "that I don't hate you." Her eyes filled with tears. "You should." I shook my head. "No. Hate keeps you stuck in the moment you were wronged. I'm moving on." She broke down then, the strong, calculating woman replaced by someone hollowed out by her own guilt. Before I left, she said something I'll never forget. "I thought I could control everything. But when you build your world on lies, the truth doesn't just destroy it, it buries you inside it." I walked out of that room lighter than I had felt in years. Daniel's company now operates under new leadership, managed by a foundation in his name. Every year, they fund scholarships for young engineers from working-class families. When they held the first dedication ceremony, they asked me to say a few words. I stood there on stage, looking at the banner with his name, and I said, "My son believed in building things that last, not just in metal or stone, but in people. He used to tell me that integrity is the strongest material there is." He was right. The crowd applauded, but I wasn't speaking for them. I was speaking to him. One evening, Oliver found Daniel's old notebook, the same one I kept after the trial. He brought it to me, eyes wide. "Grandpa, is this Dad's writing?" I nodded. He flipped through the pages until he found the quote Daniel had written. "Truth doesn't need defenders. It just needs time." Oliver smiled. "That's kinda cool." I chuckled. "Yeah, it is. It's also what saved us." He thought for a moment, then asked, "Do you think Mom will ever come home?" I took a deep breath. "Maybe one day she'll come back, but not to the same home. Some things break and stay broken, Ollie. But we can still build new ones." He nodded thoughtfully and went back to his models. I sat there watching him, the boy who'd lost so much yet carried himself with a quiet strength that reminded me of both his parents. In that moment, I realized something simple but profound. The past may haunt you, but it doesn't define you. The choices you make afterward do. If stories like this remind you that truth always finds its way, even when buried under lies and loss, subscribe to Untold Bloodline Stories. Because every family, every name, carries a legacy. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't uncovering the truth, it's finding the courage to live with it. Before bed each night, Oliver and I stand by the window and look out at the stars. He'll point to the brightest one and say, "That's Dad, right?" And I'll nod, smiling softly. Yeah. Always shining, even after the dark. Because that's what Daniel left behind, not the money, not the mansion, not even the company. He left a reminder that the strength of a bloodline isn't in its wealth or its power, it's in its capacity to forgive, rebuild, and keep going. And that, I've learned, is what truly endures.